Mate Kalau enggak, coba tes suara juga sekalian.
Halo,
Sip, sip, sip.
suaranya bagus ya?
Bagus, bagus. Kencang.
Tapi nggak diajarin cara itu.
Ini
Berapa
siskanya
banyak
kelihatan nggak?
slide, Kak? Hah? Kenapa?
Siskanya kelihatan nggak?
Kelihatan, Kak?
Kira nggak berapa. Nggak banyak sih, cuman kira yang dipresentasi cuman 16.
15 menit cukup lah ya.
Ini kalau aku tes sih 10 menit sih.
Nah, coba dulu ya.
10 menit. Oh, ya udah santai lah. Aman sih harusnya.
Apa ya?
Aman
Sukses,
harusnya.
aman. Oke.
Oh, oke, oke. Aman tuh harusnya. Koneksi aman kan ya?
Harusnya aman.
Oke, sip. Mari kita mulai sekitar 5.30. Mungkin
30 ya.
kurang dikit atau lebih dikit.
Oke.
Tergantung sama speaker yang dari luar.
Oke.
Nah, speaker luarnya ntar bakal ngomongin tentang lumpur Sidoarjo. Jadi harusnya sama-sama geoteknik.
Oh,
Itu
bagus.
aja, tinggal nunggu. Masih ya, Kak?
Oke. Ini go stop share ya berarti?
Yes. Ntar jadi yang presentasi kakak duluan ya.
Oh, saya duluan ya? Ya, ada.
Ya. Itu yang di Outlook udah saya cek, udah ada file jadwal, udah lihat belum?
Sebenarnya di Outlookku nggak kelihatan ini ya.
Kelihatan ya, saya kirim sini dulu.
Ini aja kayak dua SMA kan ada kalimat ini BK BK. Tahu gak gue ngapain BK tuh? Perkenalan diri. Itu satu semester. Jadi dia masuk sebagai tim. Kamu maju perkenalan diri. Terus dia cerita gitu. Satu semester dia kayak gitu. Nggak tahu guru BK-nya memaksa. Gurunya memaksa? Iya. BK, BK, senjata.
Hello, Mr. Phil.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you very well.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Um, okay, we're still waiting for Mr. Mark. I haven't got a reply from him.
Yeah, I haven't heard from Mike today, but if there's any problem, I can step in and do whatever he needs to do.
Okay.
Are you stopping the videos at the moment?
What?
Are you stopping the videos at the moment? I can't. It says that the host is stopping the video. Oh, there we go. That's it. Yeah, I just wanted to check the background was working okay. So do you know how many people have registered tonight? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. There's
Okay.
about 100 people in the
Oh,
forum.
wow. Okay.
There's a lot.
That's good. That's very good.
Yeah. To be exact, there's 133 people in the forum that's registered for today's event. There's a lot.
That is a lot.
Well, it's also because there's a new junior, Binusian 27. There's a lot of them, so that's good.
Okay. Oh, that's
We're
really good.
hoping, yeah, we're hoping we will keep this amount.
Yep. So, did you have a look at Brandy's presentation? It's all okay, is it? I didn't see it.
Yeah, I've seen his presentation. There's about
Okay.
17 pages.
Se-
Brandy,
17.
are you here?
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Think he
Well,
could
we
share
should be okay.
presentation.
We should be okay for
Yeah.
time. So just make sure we start at 5:30.
Yeah. Brandy, perhaps do you want to share a few of your presentation so Mr. Phil can have a look first?
Okay, wait a minute.
Okay, thank you.
There are 80 presentation, 18.
Yep.
Some of them is appendix for the question if they want to question.
Yep. Okay. Just just make sure you keep to time because we do need to start markets at on time at 6 o'clock.
Okay, I suddenly try it. It's for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
think it
Yeah,
is
no,
sufficient.
that's absolutely fine. Because he's in Malaysia, I think. So it'll be a bit later there. So
Okay.
hopefully he will log on fairly soon.
Aji udah kalau nggak salah. Itu merah. ICS yang merah. J. Aji. ICSJ kalau nggak salah itu udah. Mr. Phil, this will be the PPT for later. Perhaps do you want to look a bit? This is for
Yep.
the presentation later.
Yeah, sure.
The MC
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Kalau mau bayar itu penyanyi.
biasa start sendiri.
So, Brandy, have you left you? Have you finished university now, or are you? It says that you're a graduate. Are you still a student, or have you graduated?
I have already graduate November, last November. This November, sorry.
Sorry, say that again.
I have already graduate, fresh graduate.
Right. Okay. So now you're looking for a job.
For this time, maybe no.
Okay.
Maybe I need some month to
Okay.
think about it.
Yeah. Well, I've sent Mike a WhatsApp, but no reply. So we'll see. Malvin, I've just got a message from Mark, and he's having problems joining.
Some problems. I don't know what's problem. I think the connection should be
Yeah.
fine. Everyone can join.
Yeah.
I think he got connection problem.
So
I'm
he's
having
got
problems.
that link for Zoom, hasn't he?
I have resent the
Yeah.
link again.
Yeah,
The
I see
files.
that. Yeah, I see that. Have you sent? He's got the host. He's got the host invite as well, hasn't he?
What?
He's got the host invite
Oh.
as well.
Yeah. I have asked Riva to send him the pin list.
Okay.
I haven't seen Mr. Mike joining in. Is
Oh, no,
he okay?
I don't know, Melvin. I haven't seen him either. I've sent him a message, but no reply.
Wait for a minute.
We have to start at 5:30. So, but the problem is we have to have Mark. We can manage without Mike, but we can't manage without Mark. Ah, that sounded like Mike. Malvin, can you WhatsApp Reefa and just see if she's still at the office, if Mike is there?
I think that's impossible because it said she will be on his way home.
Okay.
And he won't be accepting any message because he's riding a motorcycle.
Right. I'm going to call Mike.
Ji, dari sini bukan Ji?
Okay, well, Mike's okay, and he will join very soon. But Mark is not.
Mark isn't responding as well.
Sorry.
Mark isn't responding as well in the mail outlook.
Yeah. Okay, so we have got a problem in that Mark is saying that Zoom won't even start.
It's to update.
Oh, lain lu nggak dipindahin.
But
Lu udah meeting apa? Udah meeting MS. Udah.
Kok namanya Malvin Bennett ya? Namanya aneh, Malvin Bennett. Bukan nama kita ya?
Okay, so it looks like Mark's in now and getting set up. So
Kok namanya Malvin Bennett ya, Bang? Hah? Semuanya ya?
Uzi, suara Uzi. Halo.
Oke, kok nggak bisa nyalain kamera?
Atau mau gantiin gua aja gantiin mau nggak?
Gua nggak bisa nyalain kamera, lu gantiin gua aja.
Hah? Apa?
Nggak bisa nyalain kamera.
Tapi gua live juga susah sih. Lu aja nggak apa-apa sih masuk kamera nggak apa. Tapi di lu nggak berisik kan? Itu lagi rame banget.
Lu bisa dengar gua?
Bisa. Ada.
Oke. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IT technical meeting.
Belum mulai.
Oke, bilang aja.
Ini gua mau start tunggu sih. dulu deh. Iya, lu juga. I'll start soon.
Yeah,
Even
yeah, I think Mark's nearly there, so let's get started, Marvin.
start. I'll start the webinar. Ji, siap-siap sih. Ya, siap. I'll start in. Wait, to start the YouTube. Okay, everything is set. I'll start in 3 and 2 and 1.
Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ICE technical. Welcome to ICE technical meeting. The Lumpur Sidoarjo volcano disaster. This event is brought to you by Institute of Civil Engineering. My name is Ignatius Aji, and I'm a student from Binusian University, and it is my pleasure to act at your master ceremony to this event. Before we start, allow me to read the rundown of our event this evening. First, I will be reading the rules of the webinar. After that, the event will start with opening remarks from Phil Woodmansey as the representative of ICE-Jakarta Local Association, and then continue by Mike Doby, who is also the representative of ICE-Jakarta Local Association. As our moderator to start the presentation of our supporting speaker, Brandy, and later will be continued by the main speaker, Robert Tingay. And the event will then continue with a Q&A session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for your own convenience, please pay attention to the following rules. You can ask your question to the speaker by pressing the raise hand feature located in the bottom of the screen. The question should be in English. The second one is you can raise your question after the presentation of the speaker end. Now, I would like to invite the representative of ICE Jakarta Local Association, Phil Woodmansey, to give his opening remarks. To Phil Woodmansey, the time is yours.
Okay, thanks, Ignatius. I just want to check that the video is working. I can't see myself and I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, welcome everyone to our ICE Jakarta Local Association presentation. This is probably going to be our last event of the year. So thank you to everyone that's supported us this year, and we've had some very good presentations. It's been a few months since we had one, so I'm particularly pleased that Dr. Mark Tingay has been able to join us tonight. And as usual, in keeping with our normal format, we also have a student, Brandy from Bina, who is a supporting speaker. So on that, I will allow Mike to take over and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
I don't know if you can hear me, Phil.
Yes, can hear you, Mike, but I can't see you.
I know, because my video's been blocked. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think mine was as well.
Okay, could the committee please unblock my video? The host has stopped it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, not yet. Oh, there we are. Ha. Okay. I'm sorry. I'd like to try and, yeah, that's okay. That's better. Right. I'm sorry, I don't have the background. You'll have to put up with my bookcase. But first of all, welcome to everybody who's joined our webinar tonight. As you know, we have two presentations. So I think because I think I will introduce the speakers in turn. I won't do it all at the front. So I will introduce Mark after the first presentation has been made. Now, the first one is by Brandy. Brandy is a student he's a fresh graduate, in fact, from Bina, from Binus. So we're not sure whether he's got himself a job yet. He might like to tell us that. But we're going to hear about slope stability analysis. You've only got 50 minutes, so I'm not going to take up your time. Perhaps you'd like to get straight into your presentation, Brandy, and explain something about what you've been doing on looking at the deformation of slopes. Thanks very much.
Okay, can I start the presentation? Can you guys see my the screen?
Yes, can see
Yes,
it, Randy.
just present it. That's it. You're fine now. It's very good.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brandy. This is I will speak about my thesis. It's about analysis stability and deformation using three different methods: LAM, FEM, and the MPM. Maybe everyone has already know about the LAM, limit equilibrium method. This wait a minute. Common method to analyze the stability, which is the soil mass is distributing force, and the shear strength is acting as the resistance. So the factor of safety that we can get is the resisting force, the ratio of the resisting force to the disturbing force. Okay, if the factor of safety is less than 1, the slope is unstable, and if the greater than 1 is stable. So different with the finite element method is a numerical method. So to calculate the factor of safety is much more different because in the finite element they use the iteration to reduce the shear strength parameter. Okay, we can see that the factor of safety that they get is from times 5 soil divided by times 5 reduction or the cohesion soil divided by cohesion reduction. The one is the material point. This is a new method. It's also the numerical method, but it has the difference mechanism. In the maybe in the finite element, the left one, they only use the one theory is Lagrangian, but in the material point method, they use two theory, which is Eulerian and then and Lagrangian. So if the in FEM, a finite element, that we can see if deformation have occurred, the mass will be distortion, and then the soil body will be collapsed. But in the motor point method, the Lagrangian one, the motor point will move, and then the deformation will continue to generate the deformation. The middle one is the mechanism how they calculate. First one is they map the material point is the black dot one, give the information to the mesh atau the nodes, computation mesh, the Eulerian, and then the Eulerian will solve the Wheeler's equation f give back again to material point, and the material point we update the position. Okay, I will list three different application. First one is Geo5 is for the limit equilibrium. Second one, the Plaxis for finite element, and then the annularity is for material point method. This annularity is open source application, so we can research it and free to download. I'm modeling two different conditions. First one is the rainfall, and the second one is the flooding and rapid drawdown. There's the waterfall that I increased from the 2 and then to 5.8 meter, and then the rapid draw discharge it into the 3 meter. This is the geometry. In the rainfall model, they use the centrifuge test. So I need to convert it to the prototype by multiple with gravitation acceleration. In the floating rapid drawdown, they use large scale model, so they no need to convert it. This is a soil parameter that I use. In Gear 5, there has no model constitution. There only has cohesion and diffusion angle. But in numerical method, there has a model constitution, and this is parameter that I use. The last one is SWRC or SWCC, soil water characteristic curve. This is for we calculate the unsaturated soil mechanic problem. Okay. This under 3D, we can see this the video. We can see if the liquid pressure is positive, they have a suction effect. Again, they will decrease gradually, and then we see the deformation from the T1 and deform it to 4.6 meter. Okay, this is the floating and rapid drawdown from the 2 meter, and then we go up 3 meter, 4 meter, and in 5 meter, the first failure will be occurred. And then if we increase again for 5.8 meter, and then the second failure is equal to. The displacement is this time is 2.9, but it will the rapid drawdown will again and get 3 meter. Okay, this is a rapid drawdown. Okay. This is a comparison from the two study literature. In the experiment, the last occur after 1 hour of rain, but in the MPM is 38 minutes of rain. But in the Anura 3D, we can see this deposit of the soil is higher than the experiment one, but is accurate. But in the praxis 2, there are local failure in here because soil has already collapsed, so they stop calculate the deformation. Here's a flooding and the rapid drawdown. You can see the first failure is of Anura 3D, and the process have the same deformation, but in the Anura 3D, they has second failure, but in the process it doesn't have. Okay. We can also see in the process 2D, they have a distortion mesh in here. This comparison about the photo safety in the Anura 3D, they can calculate the photo safety, so they only calculate the deformation. We can see the Gear 5 have slightly have a higher factor of safety that against plastic 2D. And then the calculate time is under 3D is very long. For example, the flooding and the rapid alone, I need 26 hours to model it, and then run the program. Okay, this is comparison. First, in the LAM, they can calculate the factor safety also for FEM, but the MPM cannot. For FEM, they can calculate the deformation, but not very large. And then the MPM can calculate the large deformation. Mostly constitutive model also can for FEM and MPM because they are numerical method. And then for the couple flow also, the running time of LAM is fast, but in the numerical method is medium for FEM, then MPM is very slow. The file size also, LM is very small, and then FEM medium, and MPM is large, very large. I need maybe 6 gigabyte to model the flooding and the rapid drawdown one. there's a conclusion. LAM and FEM is MPM is like on the method of they calculate. The calculation are you using the LAM is using exact solution, but in FEM the MPM they using the numerical solution. In LAM is faster than the others, so the LAM program is suitable for preliminary analysis to which design we need to use. And then for the analysis, we can use the finite element method. Okay. For NPM, maybe it's not suitable for the design, but we can use this program to calculate the deformation and then do the back calculation to get the soil parameter more accurately. That is different. This is a reference that I use. And then again, thank you for your attention. This is my presentation. Okay.
Okay, Brandy, thank you very much for your talk. It's actually, for most geotechnical engineers, it should be extremely interesting. Most of us get involved in stability analysis at some stage. And I think it's best that we invite questions for your talk now rather than later on, otherwise everyone's forgotten what you said. So we're in good time for this. So would anybody like to ask Brandy a question? I will just see in the, I can't see anything in the Q&A. Would anybody have a question for Brandy? I've certainly got one or two. Maybe I'll start then, shall I? Brandy, yeah, you almost answered some of my questions earlier on about the length of time it takes to do these calculations.
Yeah.
And I think you made it very clear that when it comes to geotechnical design, rather than analysis, design is trying to get what you need. Analysis is checking it, really. So when you're trying to run a calculation, I mean, my experience is mainly in reinforced soil. So there are many things that you can change. So it seems to me from what you say then that LEM is fast. So if you've got to check 100 versions of a cross section because you're changing various aspects of the cross section, or you want to look at sensitivity, then it seems to me that LEM is the sensible thing to use because it's so fast. Then of course FEM is, well, not that quick. And then we have this MPM, which I'm not familiar with, which seems to take far too long to be useful, unless you're just going to do one analysis of one particular situation where it's very critical. Then, of course, it would be useful. So, I mean, any further comment about that? I mean, you did actually cover this in your conclusions, but it seemed to me to be a very important point from what you've shown to us today.
In the reinforced, right?
Not just any situation. It's just the usefulness of limiting equilibrium compared to the other methods when it comes to design, because in design of something, you're normally going to be looking at many cross sections, and you want to adjust your cross sections to get what you might call the most cost-effective result. And it's always seemed to me that even FEM's a bit slow for that, but this other one seems to be impossible. So I mean, if you've got any more comments to add about how long it takes to do these things and when they might be useful?
Using the MPN one?
All of them, all three,
All of them.
how they compare.
For me, LM is quite okay for the analysis. But if we need to check for the design, we need using the FEM one. Because in the LEM, we can see there are difference with this the factor of safety that we get from the GFF is slightly higher for the plastic study because the unsaturated soil mechanics in the GF5 is different with the plastic study, which is they using the capillary pressure. The suction is maybe a little higher than the plastic study do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the development it also has the difference too. Okay. In the process study and Geo5 is quite different with the Anima 3D. So maybe it's the one point that we can using the Anura 3D to get the accurate deformation.
Yeah, okay. There's still no questions on Q&A, but I'm not sure who can actually talk to you live, but clearly we have Phil online. Phil, I mean, any it's a geotechnical matter. Any
Yeah.
comments or questions on this?
Yeah, there's nothing on Q&A, but I just to follow up, Mike, I think this tool would be very useful for seismic deformation analysis. Limit equilibrium doesn't handle that particularly well. It's got a rather crude Newmark method. So you kind of, once you've got a factor of safety below 1, it doesn't necessarily mean that the deformation is going to be huge, and LEM doesn't handle that very well at all. So then we often jump to Plaxis, and I'm not familiar with this MPM method either, but I'm assuming if you're starting to see quite large deformations and you have identified your critical section, then MPM could be quite useful. So I don't know how fast it really is. I know Plaxis 2D is not too bad. It's certainly not fast. 3D is even worse. So Brandy, perhaps just quickly, if you ran one section, say of quite a big slope, and you wanted to see how much it deformed, how long would it take MPM? How long would it take you to run the model once the model is set up?
It's quite long because
well, is it a day or 2 days or 6 months?
For the running the program?
Yeah.
Or the calculation on. Because in the modeling they using the GID simulation, so we need to model it with different way, like Plaxis they have already has.
Yeah. So does it take a few hours to run or a few days?
Depend on the model we do. Okay. For example, if we in the rainfall, I only need the 30 minutes, but in the flooding and the rapid drawdown is higher, is 26 hours.
Yeah. Okay, well those are not too bad. I mean, 3D is always difficult. I'm amazed it can do something in 30 minutes, quite frankly. I mean, they're not too bad, Mike, for deformation modeling, which is what we would typically do. But yeah, you've obviously got to just reduce the number of sections, sort out your critical section, and use that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Phil. I think that's some very wise words there as well. But well, there's nothing else on the Q&A, and I think we're getting quite close to the time for our main presentation. So I think I would just like to thank you, Brandy, for preparing that presentation. It was beautifully done in the rather short time you're given to do it, and we certainly learned quite a lot from your short presentation. So I think it was very nicely assembled. You kept it simple. And for our student presentations where we don't give you very long, I think some other students might like to learn from what you did, because I thought it was very good. Okay, so you may now relax and enjoy our main presentation. So I now have the job of introducing this, and our speaker is Dr. Mark Tingay. Now, sadly, I've never met you, Mark, yet. I hope we can sort it out one day and fix it somehow. But before I introduce you, I'd just like to introduce Lucy. Lucy, of course, sounds like a very nice young lady's name, but this particular Lucy was far from being a nice young lady. And I think, as I hope most of you know, it stands for Lumpur Sidoarjo. And it was my observation a little bit. I mean, I was watching this closely when it happened. I think anyone geotechnical would have been doing the same thing if they lived here in Indonesia. And I think it maybe slightly disappeared from people's view. And I talked to a few of our younger engineers recently, and they never even heard of it. And because I also had looked at some student papers which involved analyzing the stability of the buns that is now holding back the mud, which are quite interesting, actually. I felt that it would be very nice to have someone talk to us about Lucy, to tell us rather more about it. And I made some contacts around the place. I started off with a gentleman called Richard Davies, who had been quite active in publishing things at the time. And Richard said he was no longer very familiar with it and suggested I contact Mark, which I did. And I was very pleased to say that Mark accepted my invitation to talk to the ICE here in Jakarta, because it's, in my opinion, highly relevant. Now, I just want to mention one other thing about Lucy. It always one of the things that happens in Indonesia often is that various issues get reduced into some small name or their initials or something like that. We've all heard of things like KKN, and of course, once you do that, you forget what it actually means. But I think it's a bit like that with Lucy. It's such a nice name that I think people forgot what a horrifying thing it was, and I guess it still is today. Anyhow, that was just a little bit about it. You're going to hear all about it soon from Mark, I'm sure. So I don't need to say any more about Lucy. But so Mark, you again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So we know from your CV that you are a geologist and a geophysicist, and you specialize in high pressure and high pressure in fluids and water, I guess, deep in the ground. And when it comes to geotechnical engineers, I mean, we get excited when things get up to about 10 meters of waterhead, but you're dealing with different numbers, and I'm sure we're going to learn a bit more about that in a minute. So I'm looking forward to that as well. You've worked both in, or Mark's worked both in industry and academia. In fact, when I first tried to get in touch, he was under Adelaide University, and I think he's still attached to them, but he has more recently moved to Kuala Lumpur and is now working for Petronas as head of their. It's interesting. It's their high pressure and geomechanics. Yeah, it's a very interesting title. Again, you might like to tell us a bit more about that. And also interesting to hear that, and I think this is why we have the right person to talk to us today, and that is that Mark is passionate about mud volcanoes. I mean, they are extraordinary things. I don't know how many people here have been to see one. You can't really see Lucy anymore because it's up on top of a bund. But there are plenty of other ones along the north coast of Java, and they now, I mean, they've been there a long time, and they're well behaved, and they act as tourist attractions. But you're going to learn in a minute that Lucy is quite different. Anyhow, I think that's enough from me. I don't want to take up too much of your time, Mark, but thank you very much again for agreeing to talk to us tonight, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. So I will hand over, and if you would like to share your presentation, you'll need to share the screen first, and then it's the green thing in the middle at the bottom, and then run your PowerPoint file.
Thank you very much, Mike. Let me just give me a second to try to make sure this is all set up okay. How are we looking now?
We see it, but that's shared, but you need to press the presenter view. You're showing.
Okay, where are we? This one? I think I'm already okay. Where am I?
Well, in that case, there's a thing where you can swap them at the top. That's right. You can
this one.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay,
that's
I'll
right.
leave you to it.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yes, so thank you everyone for attending today. As you heard, my name is Mark Tingay. My day job is to work for Petronas, the national oil company of Malaysia, where I lead the pore pressure and geomechanics group there. So that's understanding the deep fluid pressures that occur in the earth. So the pressures in the fluids that are between all the grains in the sedimentary basins, and geomechanics, understanding how rocks bend and break in the oil patch. However, while I've been in the industry more or less full time for the last 10 years, Prior to that, I was an academic where I studied geomechanics and pore pressure and also worked on mud volcanoes. And I'm extremely passionate about mud volcanoes. Mud volcanoes are anywhere on the earth that high pressure fluid mud is erupting to the surface. And we have a number of those in Indonesia, as well as here in Malaysia and in many other countries in the world, such as Azerbaijan. And I maintain a associate professorship at the University of Adelaide, and that's why I'm presenting this under my University of Adelaide cap. This is not a Petronas talk in any way. This is all work that was done prior to my joining Petronas. And I have to say, this is the first time I've presented this work on or my research on my learnings on Lumpur Sidoarjo to a civil engineering group, and so I'm very interested in that. And I'll do my best to make it less of a geological or petroleum engineering side of things. So today, what I want to talk about is the Lumpur Sidoarjo, or as you heard, Lucy disaster. And I want to focus on just giving you some background about the history and what's happened there. What's what have we seen and some of the efforts have made to stop it. And then I'll focus on what is really the major controversy that surrounds the disaster. And that is what triggered it? Why did it occur? And the two competing schools of thought on that, and where what most of the academic community is kind of settled upon. Okay, so let me move on. Did the slide change okay? Can I just check?
Yes,
Yeah,
perfect,
yeah,
Mark.
it's
It's
good,
great.
Mark.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So this is Lumpur Sidoarjo. Lumpur Sidoarjo first began to erupt early in the morning, probably slightly before dawn, on the 29th of May 2006. So that is almost precisely 17 and a half years ago. And what many people don't realize is that it is still going today. Unlike many natural disasters that are terrible disasters, horrific disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis, that they cause great damage, but over a relatively brief period of time. What sort of sets Lucy apart as a disaster is that it is constantly ongoing. 17 and a half years of non-stop flow from this newly created mud volcano. So here we are. We are in Sidoarjo, where we're in the Porong district of Sidoarjo, just south of Surabaya, so one of the Indonesia's, of course, most populated cities. And this is a rice paddy or field surrounded by factories and buildings. And in the middle of that, early in the morning on the 29th of May, a hole opened up, a small hole you can see here, a few meters wide, that started spitting out mud. Now, in the first few days, that mud flow was a relatively small 5,000 cubic meters per day. That's still quite a lot. That was enough to very rapidly start flooding the surrounding areas. As you can see here, this is only just after a few hours. It's already covered quite a lot of ground. But things got particularly bad about a month and a half later, at the end of August, the start of August, the very start of August, where flow rates jumped from that sort of 5,000 or so cubic meters a day up to about 180,000 cubic meters a day for certain periods. They then settled down for a while. It was around 100,000 cubic meters per day, and then has gradually decayed to more or less steady flow over the last decade and a half of about 5,000 to 4,000 cubic meters per day. Now, those numbers may not mean a lot. 100,000 cubic meters a day is about 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and the rate of that would be enough to sort of fill an entire sort of 3 or 4 bedroom home in just a few minutes. So it's a fairly large amount of volume to be coming out of the ground every day, day after day for now 17 and a half years. Here's Lucy down here on the side, where it's in one of its most eruptive phases on early August, where you can see it throwing mud out of the ground at very high rates. Now, of course, all that mud flowing out of the ground, spilling over the ground, very quickly started to inundate the area. And unfortunately, this isn't a densely populated part of the world. This is really, while mud volcanoes are natural features that we know quite a lot about, this is the first time in history that a brand new mud volcano has suddenly appeared, and that one of the first times in history that a brand new mud volcano has suddenly appeared, and has appeared in essentially an urban area. So this caused huge devastation. It was while lots of efforts were being made in the first few weeks to sort of contain the mud flow and limit some of the damage. You can still see some of the early damage covering major roads. When that mud flow really started to increase to over 100,000 cubic meters per day, the defenses being put up were nowhere near adequate and nowhere near fast enough. There was rapid flooding of many dense urban areas, and currently over about actually 40,000 people have been permanently displaced. These people can never go back to their homes. So there's no ability to rebuild. This is now a 7 square kilometer lake of mud over what was a large part of an Indonesian city. Total of about 12 entire villages have been wiped off the map, over 11,000 buildings, well over 600 million in lost property, estimated over 2.7 billion in damages, and an ongoing effort to maintain the dams that hold back this mud flow. I want to try to give you a bit of an idea. This is a Google Earth image from, I believe, the 1st of July. So this was about a month after the mud volcano first appeared. You can see how it's the mud volcano is in the middle. If I change to if I get a laser pointer, the mud volcano initiated here in the middle, and the mud flow had started flowing into these fields, but also over what you can clearly see are factories and houses with roofs still sticking out of the ground. And you can see grey on the streets here, what was very clearly a lot of houses. Keep an eye out on all the houses here, and particularly up here in this area, because this is what it looks like now. They're gone. The entire area now is completely one large 7 square kilometer mud lake. If I go back, you can see the area up here, all of these areas here that were all houses, they're gone. That mud lake it would have been even larger, but as was said earlier, it's being held back by a large series of dams that I've kind of traced the outline of those, but there's also a lot of internal dams as well. Those dams can be over 15 meters high in places. They're being continually built up to essentially hold back this mud flow. To date, I estimate about 250 million cubic meters, or a quarter of a cubic kilometer of mud has been erupted from the Lucy mud volcano. Most of this mud, well, one of the things that they're doing to sort of mitigate this is actually they add water to the mud to make it more fluid, and then they push and sluice it into the nearby Porong River at the bottom here. So huge volumes of mud have been poured into the Porong River, which has also changed the ecosystem there. But I want to emphasize again, this mud lake in places is estimated to be over 50 meters deep, because all of that mud that's coming out of the ground, all that fluid pressure and sediment that's come from underground and been dumped on the surface, has caused the entire surface of the earth in that area to subside in places more than 40 meters. It's an approximately 22 square kilometer area that has actually subsided as a big bowl over the region. Here's a few videos. This is a video from Greenpeace taken in August, early August and September. This is Lucy in sort of its maximum eruptive phases. You can see mud really being hurled out of the ground from a crater, a big vent that's almost 100 meters wide. This was a hole that was being drilled to try to actually act as a relief well. It was a failure of an effort. Here you can see construction trying to build up to build up dams and levees to hold back that flow. But of course, not before over 11,000 buildings and 40,000 people's homes were inundated. This next video is from about 1 year. I don't know why it's having some issues. It'll clear up in a sec. Here we go. This is after about a year where they got the sort of the flow more or less under control. They kind of at least built up dams to sort of what are quite near to the current size of about 7 square kilometers in area. This is the mud still flowing out in those days about 20 to 30, 40,000 cubic meters per day. Here's what it looked like when you stand on the edge of the crater rim. You can't do that anymore. The crater rim's long gone. It was subsiding at times of up to 1 meter per day. And there was just no way they could sustain the crater, the wall that they built around the crater itself. So they lost control of that, and that's now long and truly buried. But this gives you all of these houses just completely covered up to their eaves in mud, and today they're all gone. They're all completely buried. If you look closer, you can almost see how the area subsided, how this is almost like a big bowl when you look at it from an oblique angle, that the ground is collapsing under the weight of all that material that's been removed from the subsurface and laid on the surface. Now, when this happened, they did make a number of efforts to try to kill the mudflow, and I thought I'll put these in just because it might be of more interest to a civil engineering audience. There were a few efforts made to try and kill the mudflow using wells. There was efforts to drill a relief well. There was efforts made to get back into the Banjo-Panty 1 well that is considered to be the cause of the mudflow, or the reason why the mudflow occurred. Those efforts failed, unfortunately. They were probably too little and too late, as we'll talk about later. There were some other efforts made, though. There was the infamous ball and chain experiment, where they made up 400 or so sets of these concrete ball and chains. You can see them here. There's some two large concrete balls and two small concrete balls that would then be attached together, linked together with a chain, and they made up hundreds of sets of these balls and chains, and then just dropped them into the hole, with the idea being that maybe they would all fall in and sort of combine, all get wrapped around the chains together and maybe plug up the hole. Now, honestly, I don't know quite why this idea was considered. I mean, first of all, it was unlikely to work, given that my understanding is the concrete that was used was actually pretty low spec and was likely to just be disintegrated quite quickly under the heat and under the abrasiveness of the material that's coming out of the mud volcano. But also, if you plug the top of a mud volcano, it's just going to come out in other places. In fact, on the very first days that this mud volcano started, that Lucy started, it didn't come out from a single vent. It actually came out from 4 or 5 vents spread out along the line, with the eventual vent that's going today just being the major one. And in some cases, even now, the vent splits into 2, and the eruptive location splits into 2 zones, and then often just swaps back to one or another. So plugging one hole is just going to cause the pressure to come up in another hole. So that was, while they did drop a lot of these balls and chains in, and what was quite fascinating is they measured that many of them dropped down to below 800 meters under the ground level. There was no impact on the mud flow. Nowadays, what they do is they mix water with the mud, and then use screw pumps to sluice the mud into the river. So here's the Coron River here. That has actually dumped so much sediment into the river that it's generated a new island that's often known as Lucy Island, that's literally made of all of the mud that's flowed into the river and then deposited at the river mouth. This is also believed to have caused large damage to the fisheries in the area. This is kind of what I think is one of the most amusing ideas. This was an idea to create a big dam that was going to be combined with an apartment complex and sporting facility over the top of the mud volcano. The idea here was that if you build this big sort of 50-meter high copper dam over the top of all around the vent, that would somehow generate enough hydrodynamic head to push back and stop the mud flow. I'm not convinced that this would have been nearly enough, given that the pressures coming up from underground are extremely high pressure. We're talking very very high pressures, tens of thousands of psi. I don't think this would have exerted enough pressure. And yeah, the fascinating idea of combining the copper dam with apartments and sporting complexes is certainly quite an interesting and novel one. And of course, the locals did make their own efforts to stop the mud volcano with, of course, prayer and also sacrifice of up to approximately 420 animals. That was banned in late 2006. But yes, there was a lot of local efforts to try to stop the mud flow, but unfortunately nothing has worked. And our estimates are that this disaster could continue for several decades more to come. An average estimate from our reservoir models is that this will last for approximately 37 years, give or take about 20 years. Now, what has made this disaster quite unique as well is the controversy surrounding it. That's typically we don't have this sort of controversy with major disasters. If they're a man-made disaster, it's usually pretty well understood it's a man-made disaster. If it's a natural disaster like an earthquake or a volcano, it's pretty well understood it's a natural event. But with Lucy, there is a large controversy amongst scientists about whether this was an entirely natural event, or whether it was a man-made industrial accident. And the two distinct and very separate and competing theories are that one is that this disaster was actually triggered by an earthquake. And there was the absolutely terrible May 27th Jogjakarta earthquake that occurred in 2006 that killed over approximately 5,000 people. Absolutely terrible tragedy in terms of loss of lives, about 5,000 compared to about 25 lives that have been lost at Lucy. And the idea is that this big earthquake caused shaking underground that triggered the Lucy disaster. The competing theory is that the eruption was triggered by what's called an internal blowout, a loss of pressure control in the Banjarpanji 1 exploration well that was being drilled about or less than 100 meters away from the disaster. Here's a photo in the first day or so of the disaster, where we can see the rig that was drilling the Banjarpanji 1 well onshore and the Lucy vent. So the earthquake 250 kilometers away, or the well that was approximately 100 meters away. Now, just to run you through sort of the earthquake hypothesis, the idea here is that prior to the event, we had a geology like this. We had the Pukangan Formation, which is kind of more sandy. Then we had this thick shaly zone called the Upper Kalibeng Shales. It's a very thick, very thick and very pressured shale. And this is actually where the sediment that's erupted from Lucy comes from. So Lucy, when it erupts to the surface, is erupting water mixed with sediment. The water actually comes from quite deep down at these carbonates, sometimes called the Kujung, probably more precisely a different formation. But the water comes from a deep formation and then mixes with shale on the way to the surface. So we have the Pukangan sandy formation, the Kalibeng shales. We have some volcanics and volcaniclastics that then seal off a very high pressure, huge limestone aquifer, which is the source of this massive volume of water. So Lucy at its essence is a water escape feature, a huge amount of high pressure water in an aquifer about 2.8 kilometers underground that has found a way on the 28th or 29th of May, found a way to the surface, somehow managed to get up to the surface. The idea of this theory is that the shaking of the earthquake when it passed caused liquefaction of these Kalibeng clays. That liquefaction of the clays caused pressure to build up. Gases gets dissolved. It gets exsolved out of those. Gas that's dissolved in the waters in those shales gets exsolved, and then that builds up pressure, which is believed to have then reactivated an existing fault line, the Waterkosak fault. When that fault reactivated, it became permeable, allowing fluids to rush up. Allowing most fluids to rush up from here and gradually potentially to come from deeper. Now, before I get on to sort of the reasons why this theory has been is largely not considered as valid, the idea of an earthquake triggering a mud volcano is extremely sound. That is a very common thing we see. When we have big earthquakes, it's quite common to see nearby mud volcanoes get reactivated. We do know that mud volcanoes can be impacted by nearby earthquakes. So that's certainly not an unusual situation. And also, this is an area that has other natural earthquakes around it. There are about half a dozen natural earthquakes within about 75 to 100 kilometers of the Lucy site. So we know that it's an area that geologically has mud volcanoes, and we do know that big earthquakes can trigger mud volcanoes. However, just because they can trigger mud volcanoes doesn't mean they always do. And what has been found through years and years and years, decades of observing those events where earthquakes trigger mud volcanoes, is that there's an empirical relationship. There's a threshold that needs to be exceeded before we actually have an earthquake trigger a mud volcano eruption. And what's been found is that when we look at all the earthquakes that have occurred, and there's actually over 300 known instances of where an earthquake has triggered a mud volcano eruption or something similar, like a geyser eruption or a sudden change in stream discharge, a surface hydrodynamic effect. In the over 300 instances where we've documented, or where people have documented an earthquake triggering a mud volcano or something similar, there's a relationship where the earthquake has to be either close enough or high magnitude enough to trigger that event. And we look at it in terms of what's called the seismic energy density. Now, the units of that are joules per cubic meter, so energy per cubic meter. And one way of thinking about it is how much shaking there is per cubic meter. What's the actual sort of the effect of those earthquake waves within a volume of rock? And as you can imagine, the bigger the earthquake, or the nearer you are to the earthquake, the more the seismic energy density is. And the further you go away from the earthquake, the less that seismic energy density is going to be. And what we've found is that if we look at all the sort of earthquake magnitudes and the distance of where the hydrodynamic effect is, we get all of these black points, the squares, the triangles here, all of these black points. And they essentially show that we've never, ever seen an earthquake trigger a mud volcano or a hydrodynamic vent if the seismic energy density is less than 0.1 joules per cubic meter. So it's never, ever occurred in any of the 300 odd instances. And now it's actually more. We've got about 70 or 80 more. It's never, ever been seen. And the Yogyakarta earthquake plots up here. It's about 0.005 joules per cubic meter. In fact, it's 1/20th of the absolute minimum we've ever seen an earthquake trigger a mud volcano. So it seems a bit unusual that why would this earthquake in particular cause a mud volcano? And in fact, when we look at the region around Lucy and the history before Lucy, there are dozens of earthquakes, or about a dozen earthquakes, so 13 prior quakes, these yellow dots, that all were theoretically large enough to have triggered a mud volcano eruption, or potentially trigger a mud volcano eruption, and none of them did. So we've had bigger earthquakes, a dozen bigger earthquakes that were, and in fact, these two dots here are both nearer and bigger than Yogyakarta earthquake. And they had no impact at all at the Lucy location. So really have to wonder, why would it be possible for the Yogyakarta earthquake to trigger this when no other earthquake in history of that sort of seismic energy density has ever triggered a mud volcano eruption? And there were many, many bigger and more likely earthquakes that had no impact at the Lucy location. And more recently, we actually figured out another way to test this. And the idea, the whole theory of Lucy being triggered by an earthquake, relies on the earthquake initiating liquefaction, shale liquefaction in these Caliban clays here. And while I'd spent many, many years looking at the borehole and focusing on the borehole and looking at trying to understand and decipher the drilling reports, or trying to extract the drilling reports from the company, it took me a little while to suddenly realize that we could flip that and we can use the well to test the earthquake idea. If the whole idea of the earthquake triggering is that it causes this liquefaction in these clays, and we have a borehole 100 meters away from where Lucy occurred, where we have about 800 meters of the well that was open and exposed to those Caliban clays for the 2 days between when the earthquake occurred and when Lucy began to erupt. And at least for the 1 day between when the earthquake occurred, and things started to go wrong in the wellbore, and they ultimately took a well control incident. And in those entire 24 days, over that entire 24-hour period where the earthquake occurred and nothing occurred in the wellbore, we're constantly measuring the gas that comes out of the well. We're circulating mud down through the hole. So we're constantly putting what's called drilling mud down the hole. We need to use drilling mud in the hole to actually have a sufficient density to keep any fluids from coming into the wellbore. And as that mud gets to the surface, we shake it and extract the gases from it to detect if there's any hydrocarbons or any evidence of gases in the rocks. And for the 24 hours after the earthquake, the well experienced absolutely no change, no increase, in fact, a slight decrease in any gases that were coming from underground. Now, the theory for the earthquake is that the moment that earthquake struck, huge liquefaction was supposed to occur throughout the Caliban plays. That huge liquefaction was supposed to generate so much gas that it would massively increase the pressures underground, causing the rocks to fail and a fault to be reactivated. However, the gas readings we have from the 24 hours after the earthquake demonstrate that there was no activity and no evidence of any liquefaction occurring in a well just 100 meters away from where Lucy eventually erupted. So this appears to be fairly direct evidence to test and debunk the earthquake trigger for Lucy. So that sort of leads us to the other idea, which is, was this an industrial accident? Was this a human-caused event? And again, this is not an uncommon thing. Unfortunately, there are quite a few instances of mud volcanoes being triggered by blowouts or by accidents during drilling. We've seen these in Malaysia, we've seen these in Brunei. There was one in Venezuela that lasted for over 25 years. And actually would have lasted for longer if they weren't already also drilling additional wells produced from the source aquifer. The idea of the drilling trigger is that on the 27th of May, they were drilling down through the rocks and penetrated these limestones. So they penetrated these limestones. When they penetrated the limestones, they first had what's called total losses. That means all the mud that they pump down the drill string and that comes out through holes or jets and nozzles in the drill bit, that all disappeared. It all just vanished into the formation. Now, when you have total losses, that's a big issue because we have to keep the well completely full of mud, high density mud, so that there's sufficient hydrostatic head in the wellbore to exceed the fluid pressure in the surrounding rocks. If the fluid pressure in the surrounding rocks becomes higher than the fluid pressure in the well, then we have what's called an influx or a kick. Fluids come from the formation into the well, then they can rush up to the borehole, up the top of the borehole. That can cause gases and flammable substances to erupt violently at the wellhead. You look at the old movies like Giant or other things, there will be blood, someone dancing around, some Texan guy dancing around going, yeah, with all the oil coming out of the well. No, we don't ever do that. We don't ever want oil flowing out like that, gushing out of the well. It's got to be maintained, kept safely underground by having a high pressure in the hole at all times to prevent fluids from coming from the formation into the well. If fluids come into the formation, that's from the formation into the well, that's called a kick. If that kick comes out of control and we can't stop it, we can't do anything to prevent that happening further, that becomes a blowout, a loss of control situation. And unfortunately, losses, when we start losing all the fluid that we're pumping into the hole down into the formation, that causes us to start losing our hydrostatic head. So that's a serious situation. What happened was that once they had the losses, they dumped a whole bunch of what's called lost circulation material. It's specialized material to kind of plug up the borehole and try to stop losses from occurring. That they did that, it reduced the losses, but didn't actually stop them. The losses continued for hours and hours and hours. While those losses were occurring, they decided to pull the drill string out of hole with the idea of then setting what would be called a casing, a steel pipe that they would then cement in place to seal up the well and to stabilize the hole. However, before they could pull the drill string out of the hole, so while they were pulling the drill string out of the hole, they took a kick. They lost the fluids, the hydrostatic head in the well dropped to a sufficient level for fluids to start rushing in from the bottom of the hole, from this deep limestone aquifer. And they took about 360 oil barrels worth of water, of watery mud coming out of and reaching to the surface before they shut in what's called the blowout preventer, the BOP. The blowout preventer is a series of big valves that we have at the surface, or just at where the well starts on the ground. In the offshore environment, the blowout preventer will actually be on the seabed. In an onshore well like this, it's just above ground level. It's a series of valves that are designed to be able to close up the top of the hole, to actually seal up the annular space between the outside of the well and the drill string. Okay, there's also valves in place inside the drill string to stop fluids from rushing up the inside, back up the inside of the drill string. There's one-way valves to prevent that. So the blowout preventer's job is to essentially close off the top of the hole, seal off that top of the hole. Now, the problem is that doesn't actually stop the fluid coming into the wellbore. Fluid will continue to go into the wellbore until the pressures equalize between the formation fluid pressure and the pressure in the hole. Now, a blowout preventer works well if the fluid pressure can stabilize. However, if before the fluid pressure can stabilize, the pressures inside the well increase so much that they crack the surrounding formation, then that can cause a reactivation of a fault or can induce a fracture that then allows what's called an internal blowout or an underground blowout to occur, which is where the fluids don't come up to the surface. The kick or the influx fluids don't come to the surface of the wellbore. They actually find their own path through a fault or a fracture and erupt at the surface some distance away. In some instances, that can be 5, 6, 7 kilometers away. In other instances, it's literally right next door to the wellbore. And the idea with the hypothesis for the drilling trigger of Lucy is that, yes, that when they closed off the blowout preventer, pressures inside the wellbore spiked, and we have measurements of that. There's pressure measurements in the hole. Pressure measurements spiked. They exceeded the value that we know would fracture the rock, because we do safety tests before drilling each hole section to know what pressure we shouldn't exceed in a well control situation. And they vastly exceeded that safety tolerance. That would have initiated a fault reactivation or fracture to form that then caused the fluids to gradually make that fracture propagates up to the surface and eventually becomes the Lucy mud volcano. And as I say, there's a lot of evidence to support this. First of all, it is a very close, this is right next door. This is not an earthquake 200 kilometers away. This was being drilled less than 200 meters, in fact, less than 100 meters away, and was suffering these issues. All of these issues, taking losses, taking kicks, everything we see in every other instance of an underground blowout creating a mud volcano. We know that this occurred all just in the 21 hours or so prior to the Lucy eruption. So in that 21 hours before Lucy was first seen at the surface, we took this influx. We see the pressures spike in the well underground easily enough to exceed what's called the fracture gradient, the pressure required to crack open the rock, and then lose control as an underground blowout. We then are actually able to follow the pressures inside the well over the next 21 hours and actually see what looks very clearly like the propagation of a fracture, but then shut down, all the pressures drop back to zero at the very instant that the mud volcano erupted at the surface, all suggesting a link between the mud volcano and the well. Now, I'll talk about insufficient casing issues, the kick pressure, the blowout pressure easily exceeded the fracture gradient. All those sequences of losses, kicks, lack of casing, low kick tolerance, these are all exactly the same things we see in every other similar oil field accident. And there was one other observation that was made at the day. This actual crack, it's hard to see, but there's actually a pen here to give you an idea that a pen about 10 centimeters long just goes across one side of the crack. This crack, there's no fluid erupting from it, but this crack actually goes precisely from the the main vent of Lucy to the Banjo-Panji 1 wellhead, precisely from point A to point B, indicating that there's a connection between the two. Now, the main reason why we believe that this disaster occurred and why it was likely avoidable comes from actions that were taken days and weeks before the disaster occurred. And that was really the lack of what we call protective casing. Whenever we drill an oil well or a gas well, we always drill it in stages. We start with a very big diameter drill bit. We drill a shallow hole, and then we set a pipe that we then fill with cement around the outside. So that's called a casing. We do that in stages, and as we set each casing, as we drill a section that's a narrow, we get progressively narrow drill bits. We use progressively narrow drill bits and progressively narrower casings, so that as we go, we drill a little section and essentially then line it with steel, then fill the whole area with cement, so that we stabilize the well, protect the outside of the hole, and so that we can also raise the mud weight inside the well without fracturing the surrounding rocks. So that's why we have to do this, so that we can actually maintain what's called a safe drilling window, where we keep the pressure, the mud pressure in the well above the fluid pressure in the rocks, but also below the pressure that would cause fracturing of the rocks. In order to do that, we have to drill it in stages with progressively smaller diameters and set casing after each one. And this was the design of the well. This was the planned design of the well. It was supposed to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 casing strings and only a small little section at the end drilling into the target reservoir, the two-band formation target reservoir here, with casing points roughly every 200 or 300 meters, sorry, roughly about 600 meters apart. That wasn't what happened. While they drilled the 30-inch and the 20-inch, set the 20-inch and 30-inch casing at roughly the planned depths, they had to set the 16-inch casing shallower due to stability issues of the hole. The hole was collapsing on them. Then they had to set the 13 and 3/8 casing roughly where they were going to set the 16-inch casing. So again, quite a few hundred meters shallower. And then for reasons that are still not really clear or obvious, they decided to skip the 11 and 3/4-inch casing point and just keep drilling. Then they got to the point they were supposed to set the 9 and 5/8 casing before they enter the target formation, where they expected, they'll hope there would be natural gas. And instead, they decided to not set that casing either. And actually, their plan was then to penetrate into the formation, the reservoir formation, and then set casing. This made almost no sense, because there was a well that had already been drilled just a few kilometers away into the same carbonate body. And that showed that the pressures in that carbonate body were vastly higher than anything the well could stand. So, and that was, they had that well data. It was just ignored during the drilling stages. And what wound up happening was them drilling into the formation, this target formation, and instead of having protective casing, which allows you to make the well control efforts to actually handle a kick, control the kick, raise the mud weight, circulate out any fluids that have come into the well, and then continue to drill safely. Instead of having only a few hundred meters of open wellbore to deal with, they wound up having 1,742 meters of open wellbore, and essentially having a very low fracture gradient up here with pore pressures down here that are vastly in excess of what the rocks up here can handle. So just to run through, there is controversy here, because the company involved in drilling this well has released their own version of what happened. But the problem is that when you read their version of what happened and compare it to the actual drilling with their own daily drilling reports that they have later on released, there's no correlation between the two. Everything they say happened in their own internal or their own published paper is the complete opposite of what their actual drilling records state. So while the company responsible for the well actually said that the losses that first occurred when they penetrated these carbonates were killed and that there was no further losses, the actual reports say completely opposite, that the pipe was worked, overflow was increasing, They were only getting half the return, so only half the fluid they were pumping down the hole was coming back, unable to keep the hole full, total volume displacement. They again and again and again, while they're pulling out of the hole, the drillers on site are reporting that the losses are still occurring. So the losses definitely weren't stopped, according to the drilling reports at the time. Unfortunately, once you start taking these losses, if you can't control them, the mud column that you're keeping in the hole, which is giving you the hydrostatic head to keep fluids out of the hole, formation fluids out of the hole, starts to drop. You lose the pressure. You lose your pressure protective barrier, and that's eventually triggered the kick. When the kick occurred, there was some other weird issues. Normally, when a kick occurs, it's generally detected inside of 15 minutes. That's your industry standard. Is you should detect a kick inside of 15 minutes or inside of 3 or 5 barrels of influx. Unfortunately, they didn't detect the kick. They didn't detect a kick for quite a while. And then when they did actually detect the kick, they took no action. The industry standard that you must all drilling engineers are supposed to follow, the International Well Control Foundation, you're required to do exams and assessments about well control, are that the moment you see a kick, you close the blowout preventer. It's not hard. It's a big red emergency button right there in the drilling platform. You press it, you shut in the well. It actually took, while they recorded the well was flowing, they continued to actually keep pulling the string out of the hole. Then where formation fluids actually started erupting at the surface. 365 barrels started flowing out of the surface. They were having high H2S, which was a safety risk, about an hour after they first detected the wellbore flowing. And at this time, they still hadn't shut the blowout preventer. And then only an hour and a half after the kick started to occur, did they actually close the blowout preventer and take what is always the very first action you do in the instance of an influx. Again, there's been no record anywhere of why it took so long to shut that in. Pressures were then measured to spike in the wellbore after they shut in the blowout preventer, so sealing off the top, but then having fluid still coming into the well. It's like pumping more and more fluid into the wellbore, into a confined volume. Pressure increases, and eventually the pressures got to such a level that it easily exceeded the formation fracture gradient, and that caused a detectable change variations in the pressure measured downhole. Over the next 24 hours, we measure multiple times of the pressures actually building and dropping, building and dropping, building and dropping. Essentially, the fluid builds up enough to crack open the rock. That forces the fracture to be a bit bigger. That then drops the pressure down. The fracture closes, pressure builds again, reopens, pushes the fracture a bit more, again and again and again as the fracture is propagating towards the surface. And then at 3 a.m. on the 29th of May, synchronous with this is the middle of the night, so they couldn't see anything, but they were hearing something going on, and they could start detecting hydrogen sulfide again at sensors on the perimeter of the well site. At that very moment that all of that occurred, the pressure in the well dropped to 0, showing that the well had actually, the pressures downhole had come into communication with the surface. So this was, again, very clear evidence that the well was in direct communication with the surface mud eruption. Then, again, if you read the reports made by the company that was drilling the well, they claim that there is no evidence and that there was never any indications that the well was connected to the mud volcano. However, when you read their drilling reports, they actually very clearly state that they believe there was a connection. And they actually made multiple efforts to try to use the well to kill the mud volcano eruption by pumping high-density mud and cement down the well. The idea is if you pump dense and heavy enough mud down the well, you might be able to counter the pressures building up from underground and essentially stop or reduce the mud flow. And while they couldn't stop it, they did actually notice that it reduced. Every time they started pumping high-density mud or cement down the hole, they recorded that the mud eruption reduced in size. While before they were pumping, it was sort of blasting out at sort of 7 to 8 meters in height, and every few seconds. So bloof, bloof, bloof. When they started pumping, in the period they started pumping, it reduced down. It was starting to bubble up only like every 30 seconds and only 1 meter or 2 in height. They stop pumping, it started erupting again. They pump again, it slows down. Stop, speeds up. Pump, slows down. They did it 3 times to clearly confirm that the well was in direct communication with the mud volcano. And yet the official report from the company is that that never happened, that there was never any indication of the well being in communication with the mud volcano. Unfortunately, after making those attempts that failed to sort of completely stop the mud volcano, the rig site was being threatened with inundation by the mud. So they just very quickly tried to just fill the top area of the mud of the well with cement, and then just dropped the rig and moved it away before losing what they saw as valuable equipment. Unfortunately, when they pulled the well away and the rig away, that was really where they probably lost any chance of ever having even a slight chance of stopping the disaster. But I think, in conclusion, I think when we look at the 2 competing hypotheses of what triggered this disaster, it really is, I think, pretty clear. There's actually no reliable evidence at all to support the earthquake trigger. While we do know that earthquakes can trigger mud volcanoes, the earthquake was really too far away or too low magnitude. It didn't have sufficient seismic energy density to actually trigger the disaster. No other mud volcano in history that we know of has ever been triggered by such a low seismic energy density. And when we look at the data that was actually coming from the drill rig that was open to those shales in the days before the disaster occurred, there was no evidence at all of the earthquake triggering any effect in the Banji 1 wellbore. So that all indicates that the effect of the quake was way too small at that distance to actually have any impact and trigger this disaster. The opposite of that is the drilling data. While there's still some uncertainties and there's still data that's not available, and data can potentially be interpreted in different ways, really all the data does support the drilling trigger hypothesis. We know that a kick occurred. We know that the magnitude of that kick was easily big enough to cause fault reactivation. The pressure data all indicates that. The gas data all indicates that the well was linked to Lucy, and all of the efforts that were made to try to kill the mud volcano from the well proved a direct communication between the mud volcano and the well that was out of control. And really, my view is that this was unfortunately an entirely avoidable tragedy. This could have been avoided had they undertaken proper well planning, by not ignoring offset well data, by not planning to drill into a formation that they had clear evidence was far higher pressure than the well could maintain or handle. If the rules like in diving, you plan to dive, you dive the plan. You plan the well, you drill the plan. You don't deviate from the well design. And certainly, if you are going to deviate, even in the most minor way, you go through a massive memorandum of change process to really review and critically assess all of those risks. And I should point out that this deviation of the well design by skipping those planning pacing points, one of the other companies that was involved, had a stake in this well, actually did not accept them to do this, and actually charged the company with negligence for undertaking these actions. And then the well control procedures, slow kick detection, taking an hour and a half to shut in the blowout preventer. The key to killing a kick and stopping a kick from becoming a blowout is to take quick action, and that certainly didn't occur here. So I'll give you a bit of background on the mud volcano disaster, or Lucy disaster. There's a lot of people that I've kind of worked with over the years that to sort of thank for helping provide evidence and provide information. It's a very tricky area to obtain information. There's a lot of stuff still hidden. There's a lot of stuff still confidential. But over time, the vast majority of data has now come out to allow us to really scrutinize and do a proper detective or forensic analysis of the events that led to this disaster. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you also, Mark, for assembling an incredible presentation there about a very significant disaster.
I apologize for going over time. I didn't realize what the time is.
I don't think you need to worry about that. Okay, so there are no questions in the Q&A feature. Maybe people are too amazed, but I'm just wondering if anybody would like to ask a question to Mark about the nature of this.
If anyone has any questions on the Lucy disaster itself, not just the triggering, but any aspects of it, I've obviously been working on this and studying this for quite a number of years.
I think David May had his hand raised, Mike, first.
Okay, right, David. Is David? Can he get online?
I don't know. He may have to type his question.
No. David, or can he be unmuted by somebody? I don't know.
Yeah, you can. So, chat, hold on. There's something in the Q&A. Hold on. Okay.
Here's something right. Okay. So this is from Bob Bacchiarelli. Shall we ask Bob's question? Bob, long-term geotechnical person based here in Indonesia for very many years in Bandung. Can you provide information on the relief well that was started and then abandoned in early August?
Sure. So when we call it a relief well, we abandon for what's called the idea of these wells are to actually drill another well from nearby the original well, but then actually penetrates the original wellbore. So you're actually trying to, with a hole that's only about a foot, about 30 centimeters wide, you're trying to intersect another hole that's 30 centimeters wide. That's meters, if not kilometers. The idea is if you can penetrate that, if you can actually connect your new well to the old well, you can then fill that with cement. You can try to then dump high pressure fluid and then cement in the hole and try to actually block what was essentially the tunnel coming up to the surface, or the pathway to the surface. So that was the idea of these wells, and they tried to drill two of them. They were trying to drill relief well 1 and relief well 2 that were started a couple hundred meters away. The idea being that they would drill down away and then they would deviate at an angle to try to intersect the wellbore. Unfortunately, both of them had to be abandoned after just a few hundred meters. While they were drilling, they were almost constantly taking minor influxes and losses. So they were unable to keep the well in a stable way with the mud in the well not disappeared or not having been filled by formation fluid. It was deemed too dangerous to drill, and they had to abandon those wells. Unfortunately, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do, to even under the best of conditions, to drill a relief well. Ultimately, that was how, for example, the Deepwater Horizon disaster was killed. Many months after they were able to stop the oil spill, was actually to drill such a kill well. But in this instance, yeah, it did not work. There's a second question there. Do you want me to read that out?
Yeah, no, this is from David Mee. He's one of our committee members.
Can you hear me now, Mike?
Yeah, good. No, okay. Yeah. This is David on now. Okay, David.
Yeah, I've been unmuted. No, I was interested to know if they'd advanced the 9-inch casing down to the volcanics, would that have been strong enough to prevent the blowout?
It's a very good. So if they had actually managed, so before they actually had the losses and then the kick, if they had managed to set the casing as originally planned, there's quite good evidence that would have been okay, that they would have avoided any issue. So those volcanic rocks are very, very tough. They're very stiff. They're very strong. They would have been quite a good thing to have been setting that casing in. And if we look back at the nearest well, the well that was about 7 kilometers away, what's called Porong 1 was the name of that well. In fact, the reason they drilled Banjapanji 1 was because Porong 1 was dry. It had encountered no hydrocarbon. They believed it was a breach trap. We actually think geologically that the same thing as Lucy happened naturally at Porong maybe 500,000 to 1 million years ago. But anyway, when they were drilling the Porong 1 well, they took what was the original plan for Banjapanji 1. They actually set the casing just a little bit above the reservoir. So in the shales over there, it was shales rather than volcanics, but they set them inside above the reservoir. And then they only had to drill 30, 40 meters into actually the reservoir. So they only had about a 30 or 40 meter hole to handle the influx and the kick when they actually when they drilled into the reservoir. And when they drilled into that reservoir in Pouring 1, they had the same issues. Losses, kicks, losses, kicks, losses, kicks. It was actually several weeks of well control and slowly drilling the well down another 50, 60 meters so they could start actually taking measurements and samples. But they had the same issues, losses and kicks, losses and kicks. But because the casing was very deep, and the deeper you go, the higher the fracture gradient, so the more pressure the well can withstand, they were able to maintain stability in the hole. They were able to keep the well under control and eventually complete the well. So it really, the only reason they were able to do that was because that casing was very, very deep, close to the high pressure aquifer. Had it been shallower, probably the same thing would have happened there. And so it really boggles the mind as to why the decision was made to drill into the reservoir rather than set the casing.
No, thanks very much, Mark. I mean, perhaps I'll ask a question as well, if I may. I mean, you mentioned that there's an estimate made that it should terminate in 37 years or so, but surely there'll be something going on for a very long time, because I mean, I've been to look one or two of the existing mud volcanoes along the north coast of Java, and they've just become tourist attractions. This little thing bubbles away, and they have kind of wooden duck boards going out to it, which they move around as the point of exit moves slightly. But they've obviously been there for a very long time. So does that mean...
one actually has a lot of similarities with the Bleduks? So Bleduk Kuwu, for example.
Yeah, that's the one. That's one of the ones. Yeah.
And that's an amazing one. I've got a completely different topic, but I've got articles about people visiting 150 years ago, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. They still make salt, for example, in exactly the same process as they do today. But anyway, that's going on topic. Apologies. Mud volcanoes are a sort of passion. Yeah, when we say, I was a bit wrong in saying stop, if we talk about the actual paper specifically, in about 37 years, the average of the reservoir models is when the mud flow would reduce to a relatively low rate of just about 10 cubic meters per day. So it wouldn't ever stop. We're likely to go for hundreds of years or become a relatively permanent or semi-permanent feature, but it would reduce down to a rate where it's more or less similar to a normal small mud volcano after about 37 years, give or take about 20 years.
No, thanks. Yeah, I assume that would be the case.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we're now at 7 o'clock, and I'm just any last question or two from somebody? I don't see any. Yeah. Is there another one?
Sandra wanted to ask.
Sorry?
Sandra wanted to ask.
Oh, right.
I could also warn you that my laptop, I had to put a completely different laptop in to get Zoom to work, and it's now down to 8%. I've got no way to plug it in, so we are also a lot of time limited there as well. So I do apologize if I suddenly drop offline.
Okay, well, Sandra, I'm trying to unmute you. You can unmute now if you'd like to ask. Do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, she pressed it by a mistake. Sorry, no, she's not going to ask a question. Okay, right. Sorry. Well, just so that you know, Sandra's my wife, and she was just next door listening on a different device. Okay. Right. Well, I mean that was a fascinating, incredibly well presented, and incredibly well researched piece of information. I think most of us know it's controversial to a certain extent. Oh, we do have a okay, last question then. Sorry, before I sum up then. Oh, it's gone again. Did you see that?
I think I answered it. I saw it and answered it.
Okay, probably
like
not.
flashing urgent things that it's about to die. Yeah, my answer is probably not. If they had constructed the things, I think even if it had managed to plug up that vent, it would have just come out somewhere else. Unfortunately, by the time they were trying to do this, the whole system had evolved so much that there's probably no way to kill it, other than in the first few days where most of the flow was coming from, for the first sort of 1,500 meters or so of its path from 2.8 kilometers down to the surface. About half of that it's going through the borehole, the other half it's going through fractures. It's really impossible to stop it in the fractures. The only place you might stop it is by filling the borehole. But after a period of time, that borehole would have widened, faults and things would have started to that cause the whole area to collapse. You wouldn't be able to actually then drill in and even fill that flow. The only chance you had was in those first days, maybe weeks, where most of the flow was still up that well. We think that when the mud volcano changed from like 5,000 cubic meters a day to like 180,000 cubic meters a day at the start of August, that was when the mud volcano essentially found its new pathway to the surface. And beyond that, there would be no way to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a frightening rate of flow. But yeah, sorry, let me continue then with my summing up to say that was really an interesting talk and presentation. I hope maybe it's helped maybe younger engineers to understand a bit more about what is Lucy and how things happen and so forth. I mean, my main job, I think, right now, Mark, is to thank you very much for preparing and presenting this. I found it fascinating right from the word go, beautifully presented and researched. And so I think I'll bring my my job to an end and hand back to Phil, I think, or the MC to bring the proceedings to a finish. No, thanks again.
Sorry, I'm back, but on my phone.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. We will close. Mark, on behalf of ICE Jakarta Local, we thank you for taking the time to talk to us tonight and explaining a very complex matter so clearly and understandably. That was really excellent. Really appreciate that. And also, not to forget, Brandy, thank you for your presentation today as well. I also hope you enjoyed the main speaker as well. So with that, I think it's the end of our evening. We had well over 100 people listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I suspect that will be our last for this year, but we'll look forward to catching up again early New Year and hopefully back to EP as well. So from me, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you too.
Thank you too.
All right. Thank you to Mr. Phil and Mr. Mike for guiding the session. Once again, thank you to all the speakers for your excellent presentation. Before we finish this event, please fill out the attendance form to claim your e-certificate using the following links in the chat or the QR code. And for Bina students to claim the SAT points, make sure to fill out the attendance. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached at the end of our event. Once again, thank you for your participation, and we hope to see you at the next event. At last, good evening, everyone. Stay healthy and take care, everyone.